Welcome to another AI pattern recognition deep dive.
We're here to take complex ideas, frameworks, sometimes really dense source material, and distill it down into knowledge you can actually use.
That's the goal.
And today, we are looking into something pretty mind-bending. It's like the ultimate looking glass, an AI. But not just any AI. This one's designed to recognize the very fabric of human behavior itself. I mean, think about your own life, right?
Yeah.
Your sleep cycles, maybe financial stress patterns, how you react emotionally when you're facing a deadline.
Yeah, the day-to-day stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
None of that is truly random, is it? They're patterns, often predictable, persistent patterns. So what if? What if an AI could watch all of those patterns, learn them, and then mirror them back to you in real time?
That's precisely the concept. It's the core proposal in our source material today, which is called the Mimic AI Framework, or MCAI for short.
MCAI, got it.
And it's proposed as this adaptive AI pattern recognition system. The mission behind it is, well, it's profound, really. It aims to be this real-time analytical companion. Yeah, one that fundamentally changes how we as humans relate to complexity. The goal is to help people achieve radical self-awareness, make better decisions, objectively better ones, and ultimately navigate all the complexity in our lives.
Whether that's personal stuff, work stuff, or even bigger things.
Exactly. Personal, professional, even global complexity. That's the ambition.
Okay, that sounds incredibly ambitious. And gotta say, maybe a little unnerving too.
It can definitely sound that way at first.
Before we dive into all the specific ways it could be used,
Yeah.
let's maybe unpack the architecture a bit. The sources say it's not just, a fancy prediction tool. It's built around 5 core actions.
Yeah.
How do those actually create this analytical companion?
Right. So the real power of MCAI comes from these 5 sort of continuous actions. They all work together.
Okay.
First up is observation. Basically, the AI is just watching.
Right.
Passively monitoring behaviors, decisions, patterns.
Across everything, like health, money, work.
Everything, yeah. Health, finance, work, relationships, all in real time.
So it's literally always watching.
Pretty much, yeah. Then comes step 2, which is learning.
Okay.
It takes all that raw data, everything it's observed, and starts to figure out what's normal for you.
For me specifically.
Exactly. For you as an individual, or, maybe for groups you're part of. It's building the super personalized baseline of you, and then it spots the anomalies, the things that stick out from your normal.
Anomalies meaning bad things. Or just different things.
It's different. Could be good, could be bad, could just be a shift. That leads to the third action, adaptation.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Because people change.
Precisely. Humans change, circumstances change.
Right.
So MCAI has to continuously adjust its models. Let's say you move cities or change jobs or have some big life event.
Right?
The AI doesn't just assume your old patterns still apply. It adapts that baseline, recalculates what's normal now.
That makes sense. It has to keep up. What's fourth?
Fourth is probably the most critical step, mirroring. This is where it actually gives something back.
The output.
Exactly. It provides insights, filtered insights, not just raw data dumps back to you, the human. This is how it fosters that self-awareness, how it supports your decisions. It doesn't really tell you what to do.
It shows you the pattern.
It shows you the pattern, yeah, and where that pattern might be leading, which brings us to the 5th action.
Which sounds like the most consequential one. Prediction.
Yes. Based on recognizing the trajectory of your current patterns, it predicts potential future outcomes. So you see, the purpose isn't to replace human judgment, it's synthesis.
Synthesis, okay.
It's aiming for this symbiotic relationship. The AI helps us see ourselves, and maybe our collective actions too, much more clearly. It's like getting a diagnosis before the really destructive symptoms show up.
Because if you understand the pattern leading to, a personal health issue or even a big societal mistake,
then you have an informed choice. You can try to interrupt that pattern. That's the core idea.
Okay, let's jump into that individual mirror again. Because this is where it gets, as you said, hyper-personalized. For MCI to work, it needs a really detailed map of a person, right?
Absolutely.
The sources talk about 3 main categories of personal patterns. It maps out first. What are those? What's the starting point for building that personal baseline?
It really starts with the fundamentals, the things that structure our time and energy. The first category is daily routine patterns.
Okay, like sleep.
Exactly. Sleep and wake cycles, yeah. But also meal timing, your specific nutritional choices, not just what you eat, but when. Exercise frequency, intensity.
Right.
And really importantly, mapping your personal productivity peaks and valleys. When during the day or week do you actually do your best deep work? When are you better off just handling emails? It tries to learn that rhythm.
Okay, that makes sense. The second category, though, sounds like it hits closer to the emotional core. How does an AI even begin to quantify something as messy as human emotions?
That's a great question. The second category is emotional response patterns. And it's maybe less about feeling the emotion itself and more about the triggers and reactions.
Triggers, like what sets you off.
Exactly. Identifying your specific stress triggers. Is it deadlines? Is it maybe conflict with certain people, information overload, financial pressure? It tries to map those out.
And the flip side, too. What makes you happy?
Yes, precisely. It maps your joy activators, as the source material calls them. Things like social connection, maybe a sense of achievement, spending time in nature, whatever it is for you. It also tracks things like anxiety patterns. Does your anxiety tend to build up before an event, or is it more of a reaction after something happens? And it monitors how your mood cycles relate to specific external events, looking for those predictable dips or spikes.
That feels like an enormous amount of very sensitive data it's collecting.
It is, no question. And that raises huge questions about privacy and trust, which we absolutely need to get into later.
Definitely. Okay, so we have routine patterns, emotional response patterns. What's the third one? It sounds like the output of all this, how we actually, move through the world.
That's right. The third is decision-making patterns. This looks at the inherent biases and tendencies in how you make choices.
Like, are you impulsive? Or do you plan everything?
Exactly that. Does your default tend towards impulsive choices or more deliberative, long-term planning? How high is your risk tolerance? And does that change depending on the situation?
Oh, interesting. Like maybe you're super cautious with money, but take big risks in your career.
Precisely. It looks for those domain-specific differences. It also tries to track the measurable influence of peer pressure on your actions. And, maybe most importantly, your response to known cognitive biases.
Cognitive biases, like confirmation bias. Seeing what you want to see.
Exactly. Confirmation bias, loss aversion, being more afraid of losing something than happy about gaining something of equal value, things like that. By mapping these three big areas, routine, emotion, and decision, the MCAI builds this incredibly detailed functional model of you.
Okay. Wow. That really sets the stage. And it brings us directly into the biological applications. The sources have some really concrete examples of how MCAI could monitor health using data from wearables, maybe other sensors. This sounds like it goes way beyond just counting steps.
Oh, absolutely. It's a different league from standard consumer fitness apps. MCAI monitors critical biological patterns. For instance, in the cardiovascular area, it's tracking resting heart rate trends over time, not just snapshots, blood pressure fluctuations. And crucially, heart rate variability, or HRV.
HRV, I've heard of that. That's important, right?
It's key, because it's not just your heart rate, it's the tiny variations in time between each heartbeat. It reflects the balance between your fight or flight system, the sympathetic, and your rest and digest system, the parasympathetic.
Okay.
So a significant sustained drop in HRV over weeks or months, that's a pretty reliable indicator of chronic stress, systemic inflammation, maybe burnout. It can also track metabolic patterns, like how your glucose responds to specific foods or mapping your precise energy level cycles through the day.
The sources give this great example about Sarah and her constant fatigue. She thought she was getting enough sleep, but the AI found something else.
Right. The Sarah example is very illustrative. She felt chronically tired, but her tracker said she was getting like 7.5 hours of sleep a night, which sounds okay on paper.
Yeah, sounds decent.
But the AI dug deeper into the quality. It detected a critical pattern. She was only getting about 45 minutes of deep sleep per night.
Only 45 minutes. What's normal?
Well, for proper physical and mental recovery, the normal range is more like 1.5 to 2 hours of deep sleep. So she had this significant deficit. That was the real root cause of her fatigue, not the total sleep time.
Okay, so it found the deficit. Did it know why?
Yes, that's the next step. It performed what the framework calls a cross-domain correlation. It linked that deep sleep deficit primarily to two behavioral patterns. Her caffeine consumption after 3 p.m.
Ah, the afternoon coffee.
Exactly. And exposure to blue light from screens within about an hour of bedtime. So the system didn't just give generic advice like sleep more. It offered a highly specific intervention.
Which was?
Limit coffee strictly to the morning hours. And it even quantified it. noting that her data showed late caffeine was responsible for reducing her deep sleep by something like 60%, and implement a no screens before bed rule.
That's fascinating. It pinpoints the specific trigger for her, which generic advice often misses.
That's the power of personalization.
And then there's the even more serious case study of John. This one really highlights the predictive power potentially avoiding a crisis.
Yes, the John example is quite striking. He's 55, monitored for 6 months, didn't really feel sick, no major complaints, but the MCAI detected these gradual, subtle shifts accumulating over time.
What kind of shifts?
Well, over those 6 months, his average resting heart rate slowly climbed from a baseline of 68 up to 78 beats per minute.
Okay, noticeable, but maybe not alarming on its own.
Maybe not on its own, but simultaneously, his HRV, that measure of nervous system resilience, decreased by 30%. That's a big drop. His overall sleep quality metrics declined, and certain stress hormone markers, maybe from sweat sensors or other wearables, remained chronically elevated.
So it's putting multiple subtle pieces together.
Exactly. The pattern analysis combined these seemingly minor changes, and the crucial part, it alerted John and his doctor 4 months before the models indicated he was likely heading towards a potentially serious, maybe even fatal, cardiac event.
4 months before. Wow. So they can intervene.
Precisely. The intervention came pre-symptomatically. Things like targeted stress management techniques, dietary adjustments, maybe medication. It allowed him to change the trajectory to avoid the crisis altogether.
That's moving way beyond just tracking health data. That's proactive biological management.
That's the fundamental difference, yes. It provides the chance to intervene while the negative pattern is still subtle before it becomes an emergency. That early intervention potential is, well, it's potentially monumental.
Absolutely. But MCAI isn't just pitched as a disaster avoidance tool, right? It's also about optimizing potential. And we see this really clearly in the scenarios about adaptive education, tracking learning patterns.
That's right. In education, the idea is that MCAI tracks not just your grades, but the complex process of how you learn best.
How you learn. Like visual learner, auditory learner, that kind of thing.
That's part of it, yes. Learning style, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, reading, writing. But it goes deeper. It also tracks your optimal study times. When are you most focused? It measures knowledge retention rates. How quickly do you forget things after learning them? It pinpoints specific struggle points. Where does your comprehension consistently break down in a subject? And it tries to identify your personal motivation triggers. What actually makes you want to learn?
Let's look at that hypothetical example they give about the student struggling with calculus. How did MCAI figure out the specific problem there?
So, this student was consistently bombing timed calculus tests, especially with abstract concepts. The MCAI analyzed their performance data across different learning modules and detected this massive difference based on how the information was presented.
How so?
When the student was shown abstract symbolic notation, just the equations on their own, their comprehension score plummeted to around 73%. But when visual graphs and geometric shapes were paired with those exact same equations,
Comprehension went up.
it jumped to 95%, a huge difference. It revealed this fundamental cognitive mismatch. The student was clearly a very strong visual learner who was getting lost when faced with purely symbolic representations first.
Okay, so the AI identified the bottleneck. How did it adapt the learning?
The adaptive response basically re-engineered the learning path for that student. It switched to presenting visual representations first, making sure the student grasped the concept visually before introducing the abstract symbols.
That makes sense. What else?
It also identified the students' peak focus hours, apparently 7 to 9 a.m. and 6 to 8 p.m. for this person, and scheduled the practice sessions for calculus specifically within those windows.
Targeting their best brain time.
Exactly. And it changed the review strategy. Instead of suggesting long, 1-hour cramming sessions, it implemented spaced repetition short, 10-minute review bursts spread out over time. And the sources claim this improved long-term retention by something like 40% compared to cramming.
Wow. So the pattern interruption was tailoring the how and the when of learning to that specific student's cognitive wiring.
Precisely. It's an incredible level of potential personalization.
It really is. And here's where, for me, it starts to get really interesting. Scaling that kind of precision up, not just for learning calculus, but for your whole professional path. How does MCAI apply to careers?
This is where it could offer some really profound insights into, professional alignment and satisfaction. MCAI aims to identify things like your peak productivity hours, yes, but also the hidden cost of task switching for you.
The cost of switching tasks, what do you mean?
How much time, energy, and efficiency do you actually lose when you're forced to jump between very different kinds of projects or meetings? Some people handle it fine, others find it incredibly draining. MCAI could quantify that cost for you.
Okay, interesting. What else?
It could track meeting effectiveness relative to your role and contribution, assess collaboration style compatibility with different team members, and maybe most importantly, identify those deep, often subconscious indicators of genuine career satisfaction or lack thereof.
We have that specific example in the source material about Marcus as the software engineer. He was good at his job, apparently, but felt really unfulfilled.
Yeah.
What patterns did the AI pick up that maybe Marcus himself wasn't seeing?
Right, Marcus. He's 28, highly skilled coder, but just not happy. The NCII analysis looked at his work logs, his project outputs, maybe even sentiment analysis from his communications.
Okay.
And it found his productivity measurably increased by about 40% when he was working on features that users directly interacted with, the front-end stuff, compared to when he was doing pure back-end system optimization.
So he was better when closer to the user.
That was part of it. But the really deep pattern insight came from outside his paid work. The system correlated his highest satisfaction scores, maybe derived from journal entries, mood tracking, biometric data, not with his day job at all, but with volunteer work he was doing teaching coding to kids on weekends.
Wait, hold on. The AI basically said, you seem happiest and most engaged when you're doing this thing that's completely separate from your actual job.
Essentially, yes. The core pattern insight was a clear mismatch in values. Marcus valued human connection, mentorship, seeing tangible social impact from his skills, much more than he valued optimizing abstract technical systems. He was great at the technical stuff, but his underlying drivers, his soul, if you like, were optimized for human impact.
That's a really powerful insight. Something that traditional career advice, maybe even Marcus himself, might never have articulated. So the AI saw this mismatch and suggested, what? A career change?
It did. It recommended a specific 18-month transition pathway towards something like UX engineering or product management, roles that inherently leverage user empathy, human interaction, and measuring impact on people's lives.
And it predicted?
It predicted a potential satisfaction increase of around 65%, a huge jump, suggesting the system believed it had found a much deeper, more authentic alignment for him than his current path offered.
That's quite something. Okay, let's broaden this out from career paths to, well, relationships. If MCI can map your internal needs and values, how does it possibly handle the incredibly messy dynamics of interpersonal relationships? It's like two complex sets of patterns colliding. Yeah.
It is incredibly complex, absolutely. The idea here isn't to solve relationships, but to map the patterns within them. Things like communication style compatibility. Are you direct? Is your partner indirect? Where might friction naturally arise just from those style differences? It also aims to track conflict escalation triggers. What specific topics or behaviors reliably lead to arguments? It might look at deeper attachment patterns. Are you generally secure, anxious, avoidant in relationships? And what are your core emotional support needs versus your partner's? The goal is to spot those predictable negative loops, those destructive cycles that often poison relationships over time, without anyone quite understanding why.
The sources give a really detailed example here about a couple, Sarah and James. They were stuck in this pattern of increasing predictable fights.
Yes, the Sarah and James example is a classic illustration of mapping a negative relationship cycle. The MCAI, drawing on maybe shared calendar data, communication logs, even biometric stress indicators if they opted in, found that their conflicts consistently spiked after James worked late for 3 or more consecutive days.
So it found the trigger, the extended work stretch.
It found the trigger. And then it mapped the ensuing cycle. It went something like this. James works late, right arrow? Sarah feels neglected or abandoned because of his absence. Sarah criticizes James for being absent or unavailable. James, feeling criticized, withdraws further, maybe works even later to avoid the conflict, right arrow. Sarah feels more neglected and criticizes more forcefully, right arrow. James withdraws more. And round it goes, escalating each time.
Wow. It's not just seeing the fights. It's mapping the entire self-reinforcing feedback loop. And the trigger. So what did it suggest? How do you intervene in something like that?
The interventions were aimed at breaking the pattern at key points, especially the trigger. It suggested things like an alert system for both partners when James's work schedule hits that 3-day trigger point, just raising awareness.
Okay, like a little warning light.
Kind of.
Yeah.
It also recommended that James make a point of communicating his late work nights clearly in advance to manage expectations and preempt Sarah's feeling of being blindsided or neglected.
Proactive communication.
Exactly. And maybe most crucially, scheduling 3 specific, mandatory weekly conversation times quality time that wasn't just left to chance or squeezed in after a long day. The idea was to break that negative avoidance cycle through awareness, structure, and ensuring connection points. And the courses suggest this measurably increased their relationship satisfaction.
Fascinating. Okay. Moving from the dynamics of personal relationships to maybe our relationship with money, MCAI also maps economic patterns, right? Both on the personal finance level and potentially much bigger.
Yes, it applies the same pattern recognition lens to economics. On the personal finance side, it's tracking things like your spending triggers, are you spending emotionally or based on a plane, your savings consistency, patterns of debt accumulation.
There's another case study here, Maria. What did the AI find in her financial habits?
Maria's example is interesting because it connected her spending directly to her stress levels. Her personal finance app, powered by MCAI, detected a correlation she was completely unaware of. Her spending increased by about 40% on days when her biometric data indicated high stress levels.
Wow, stress spending.
Exactly. And it got more specific. Her online shopping purchases strongly correlated with high-stress workdays, and it even pinpointed the timing. 80% of these impulsive, stress-driven purchases happen after 8 p.m.
Late night scrolling and buying.
Seems like it. And the AI didn't just identify the pattern. Based on her current spending velocity during these stress peaks and her debt levels, it predicted she was on a trajectory to accumulate an extra $3,000 in high-interest credit card debt within about 6 months if the pattern continued unchecked.
That's a very precise and potentially alarming prediction based on a subtle behavioral trigger. What was the suggested intervention? Did it just say, stop shopping?
No, it was much more targeted than that, based on the identified pattern. It suggested 2 specific actions. First, automate savings transfers on payday, before she even had a chance to manually move the money or spend it. Get it out of sight, out of mind.
Makes sense. Lock it away first.
Second, implement quite aggressive spending alerts, specifically after 8 p.m., targeting that high-risk window when her stress-induced shopping pattern was most active. It wasn't just generic advice. It was a tailored intervention aimed squarely at her moment of maximum vulnerability.
Okay, that's the micro level.
Yeah.
How does this scale up? When MCAI looks at macroeconomic patterns, are we talking about predicting recessions?
That's exactly the kind of potential application the sources explore. They describe a hypothetical scenario where, say, in 2027, an MCAI system running global economic analysis detects several concerning indicators simultaneously across different domains.
Like what sort of indicators?
Things like housing prices accelerating much faster than income growth in dozens of major global cities. Credit expanding at unsustainable rates, with national debt-to-GDP ratios climbing rapidly, and critically, a clear divergence where consumer confidence surveys remain high, maybe buoyed by stock market performance, but the underlying economic fundamentals like manufacturing orders or wage growth are actually weakening.
So a disconnect between sentiment and reality.
A significant disconnect. And the crucial step was the pattern matching. The AI compared this specific combination of signatures, the unsustainable credit, the asset bubbles, the confidence divergence to historical data.
And found matches.
It found strong matches to the conditions observed right before major downturns in the past, specifically the pre-crisis signatures leading up to 2008, the dot-com bust in 2000, and even as far back as 1929.
Wow, those are major events.
Exactly. The pattern match was so strong in this hypothetical scenario that the system predicted something like an 82% probability of a significant market correction or a full-blown recession occurring within the next 12 to 18 months.
Giving policymakers a serious early warning.
A quantifiable warning signal, yes. Offering a window, potentially, for preparation or policy adjustments to mitigate the impact. It's pattern recognition operating at potentially a civilizational scale.
Okay, that's a perfect transition into our next section, Section 4, where MCAI really zooms out to grapple with these huge systemic patterns, societal problems, political dynamics, even historical collapse. First up, how does it attempt to track collective behavior, politics, culture? That seems incredibly complex.
It is incredibly complex. The approach described focuses on measuring a couple of key dynamics. First, polarization patterns.
How do you measure polarization?
It looks at the structure of information networks online. Is information flowing freely, or is it getting trapped in echo chambers? It tracks the diversity of sources people consume. And it tries to analyze the measurable ratio of emotional language versus logical reasoning or evidence-based arguments in public discourse.
Quantifying the heat versus the light, basically.
In a way, yes. Looking at things like the frequency of high arousal emotional terms compared to, say, the density of citations or links to factual sources. The second dynamic it tracks is social movement patterns.
Like how protests or political movements gain traction.
Exactly. Looking at how grievances accumulate and reach a tipping point, how movements spread, what factors contribute to their success or failure.
Did the historical analysis reveal anything interesting there? The sources mentioned looking back from 1950 to 2025.
It did. One finding highlighted was that historically successful transformative social movements often required a surprisingly specific threshold of active population participation, around 3.5% consistently engaged. Below that, movements tended to fizzle out.
Only 3.5%, that seems low.
It sounds low, but consistently mobilizing even that percentage is apparently a huge challenge. The analysis also noted the complex impact of modern technology. Social media can accelerate the initial spread and visibility of a movement by maybe 300% compared to, say, the pre-internet era. But that rapid spread often comes at the cost of sustained, deep engagement. You get broad awareness quickly, but perhaps less of the long-term commitment needed for real political change.
Interesting trade-off. Yeah. What about economic factors influencing unrest?
That was another critical pattern. The analysis found that economic inequality, specifically when measured by the Gini coefficient, was a strong predictor. When the Gini coefficient, where 0 is perfect equality and 1 is total inequality, climbed above 0.45.
Meaning high inequality.
Right, significant wealth concentration. When it crossed that threshold, the probability of major civil unrest within that society increased by something like 67%. A very strong correlation.
And that economic pattern directly feeds into the predictive application mentioned for Region X in 2026.
Exactly. In that hypothetical, the MCAI integrates multiple pattern streams for Region X. It detects wealth inequality crossing that critical 0.45 Gini threshold. It sees sustained high rates of online polarization and echo chamber effects, and it picks up intensifying grievance rhetoric spreading rapidly through social media.
So multiple warning signs flashing red at once.
Yes. Combining these factors, the system predicts a 76% probability of significant civil unrest, potentially protests, riots, maybe even political violence occurring within the next 18 months in that specific region.
Which gives policymakers what? A chance to react.
Ideally, a chance to address the root causes the inequality, the polarization, rather than just waiting to react to an eruption. It provides a quantifiable risk assessment and a potential window for proactive intervention.
Now, connecting this to the bigger picture, you mentioned earlier that MCAI could potentially expose systemic biases, things that are hard for individuals to see because they're embedded in the patterns of the system itself.
That's considered one of its most potentially powerful and, frankly, controversial social justice applications. Systemic bias, like in hiring or criminal justice, is inherently a statistical pattern. It operates across thousands or millions of instances, making it almost invisible to any single person within the system.
Right. A judge might feel they are being fair in each individual case.
Exactly. But when MCAI analyzed, in one example, court sentencing data across a major jurisdiction over a decade, from 2015 to 2025, the cumulative patterns were mathematically impossible to ignore.
What did the numbers show? Give us the specifics.
The analysis revealed really stark disparities, even when controlling for variables like the severity of the crime and prior offenses. For instance, African-American defendants received sentences that were, on average, 19% longer than white defendants for identical crimes.
19% longer, wow.
Conversely, women received sentences that were 63% shorter than men for identical crimes, suggesting a significant gender bias in judicial leniency, maybe paternalism.
63% shorter for women. That's huge.
It is. And another pattern. Defendants wealthy enough to afford private attorneys received sentences that were, on average, 40% shorter compared to defendants relying on court-appointed public defenders, even for the same crime category. These are profound systemic disparities laid bare by the aggregate data.
Okay, those numbers are genuinely shocking. But let me push back here, critically. The sources mention an intervention, using MCAI to provide real-time sentencing recommendations. Isn't there a massive risk of just swapping hidden human bias for very explicit algorithmic bias? especially depending on how the AI defines an identical crime or what factors it weighs, who programs its definition of fairness. That feels incredibly dangerous.
That is absolutely the central ethical challenge, and a critically important one. The designers of this hypothetical framework seem acutely aware of this risk. The pilot program described for this intervention was specifically structured to try and minimize the introduction of new algorithmic bias.
Oh.
The intervention involved providing judges with real-time sentencing guidelines, but these guidelines were based only on objective case facts, the specifics of the crime, the relevant legal statutes, the measurable harm caused. Crucially, the system was deliberately blind to all demographic information about the defendant race, gender, socioeconomic status, neighborhood, etc.
So I didn't know who the defendant was, demographically speaking.
Correct. It simply flagged instances where a judge's proposed sentence deviated significantly either higher or lower from the statistical norm established by thousands of prior, factually similar cases, after those historical cases were also stripped of demographic bias in the training data. The idea was to highlight potential outliers based purely on case facts, prompting the judge to reconsider if their deviation was justified by unique circumstances or potentially influenced by implicit bias.
And did this actually reduce the disparities in the pilot?
According to the source material's description of the pilot, yes. It resulted in a measured 30% reduction in the sentencing disparities across race and gender lines. It suggests that algorithmic awareness, if carefully designed and governed with fairness as the explicit goal, can potentially serve as a check against deeply ingrained implicit human biases. But the governance and auditing of that fairness definition is absolutely paramount.
A 30% reduction is significant.
Oh.
Okay. And this pattern spotting for bias was also applied to hiring practices.
It was, yes. Analyzing recruitment data, MCAI identified similarly troubling patterns. For example, resumes with names that sounded ethnic received about 50% fewer callbacks than identical resumes with white-sounding names.
50% fewer, just based on the name.
Apparently so, in that data set. And women applying for technical roles faced 40% more rejections based on vague cultural fit reasons compared to male applicants with the same technical qualification.
Cultural fit, often a proxy for bias.
It can be. The intervention piloted there involved two main things: implementing truly blind resume screening, where all identifying information like names, addresses, even university names sometimes, were removed before the hiring manager saw them. And second, using structured interviews focused solely on objective, job-relevant skills and performance metrics, minimizing the impact of subjective gut feelings or similarity bias from the interviewer.
And the result? More diverse hiring.
The sources claim a 45% increase in diverse hiring outcomes in the departments that adopted these MCAI-suggested interventions. Again, highlighting how data patterns can reveal bias in structure can help mitigate it.
Okay, now let's scale up to the biggest, most existential pattern of all: societal collapse. The sources say MCAI analyzed historical data from, 50 different civilizations, right. Roman Empire, the Maya, others. What common threads, what mechanical patterns of failure did it find?
The analysis looked for recurring sequences and preconditions across these diverse historical collapses. It identified a kind of common pathway often triggered by about 5 key precursors appearing in combination.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, almost universally, was resource depletion. In 89% of the collapse society studied, there was clear evidence of systemic environmental degradation preceding the collapse, things like deforestation, soil erosion, over-irrigation leading to salinization. Essentially, the society outstripped the carrying capacity of its environment.
So environmental limits being breached. What's second?
Second was crossing a critical inequality threshold. The analysis found that the risk of large-scale collapse increased dramatically by around 300% when wealth concentration became extreme. Specifically, when the top 1% of the population came to control more than roughly 40% of the total net wealth.
Extreme inequality destabilizes the system.
Third was institutional rigidity. This refers to the inability of the society's governing structures, its political, economic, and social institutions, to adapt effectively to new challenges, whether internal or external. This was measured by things like legislative gridlock, declining rates of successful reform, and falling public trust in institutions. It correlated with about 76% of the collapses studied.
How does the AI model something as abstract as complexity costs? That sounds tricky.
That's the fourth precursor, and it is tricky. Complexity costs. The idea is that as societies grow larger and more complex, The resources required just to maintain that complexity, the bureaucracy, the infrastructure, the military, the information processing grow disproportionately. Eventually, the cost of maintaining the existing level of complexity starts to consume resources faster than the society can generate new wealth or energy. It becomes an unsustainable overhead.
Running just to stand still and eventually falling behind.
Kind of, yes. And the fifth factor, often the final straw, was an accelerating external stress. This could be sudden, like a major invasion or a pandemic, or more gradual, like unfavorable climate change, hitting an already brittle system. It's the shock that the weakened, overly complex, unequal, and resource-depleted society can no longer absorb.
So those 5 factors, resource depletion, inequality, rigidity, complexity costs, and external stress, they often lead to a common sequence of failure.
Yes, the analysis suggests a fairly distinct, almost mechanical 8-step pattern often unfolds, regardless of the specific culture or time period.
Okay, lay out that sequence for us.
It generally goes like this. 1, you have initial success, growth, expansion. Right arrow. $3, this leads to increasing complexity in institutions and infrastructure to manage that growth. Right 1. 3. Resource demands start to exceed the sustainable supply from the environment. 4. Inequality typically increases as elites find ways to extract more resources from the increasingly complex system. Right arrow 5. The institutions become rigid, resistant to change, unable to respond effectively to growing problems. Right arrow 6. Some kind of major external stress hits the system. Could be climate, conflict, disease, whatever. Right arrow 7, because of the internal fragility built up in the previous steps, the system loses resilience. It can't bounce back. Right arrow 8, and 8, you get a collapse, a rapid simplification, a loss of centralized control, population decline, sometimes a dark age. Or at least a major, painful transformation.
That's a sobering sequence. Looking at our world right now, in 2025, does the MCAI analysis suggest we are matching any of those historical precursors?
According to the analysis described in the sources, yes. Current global patterns show troubling matches to several of those critical precursors simultaneously.
Such as?
Specifically, wealth inequality is at or near historical highs in many key nations, potentially crossing that critical Gini threshold. We have accelerating climate change acting as a major environmental stressor and resource constraint. Political polarization is leading to institutional rigidity and gridlock in many democracies, and the costs of maintaining global complexity, supply chains, energy systems, information networks are visibly rising.
So the prediction based on these pattern matches is?
The prediction isn't deterministic, it's probabilistic. But the MCAI analysis concluded that without significant proactive pattern interruption on a global scale.
Meaning major policy changes.
Yes, comprehensive structural changes related to climate action, resource management, economic inequality, and institutional reform. Without those interventions, the risk of major societal disruption, not necessarily total collapse everywhere, but widespread crises and breakdowns increases significantly within the next, say, 20 to 50 years.
20 to 50 years. That's within the lifetime of many people listening.
It is. It underscores the potential stakes of recognizing and acting on these large-scale historical patterns.
Okay. This brings us to what feels like a really profound, almost philosophical question, right at the heart of this whole MCAI project. The sources even raise it. Why? Why build something this powerful, potentially this dangerous, when human history seems to show we have this tendency to destroy or misuse almost everything we build? We build amazing cities, then level them in wars. We gain knowledge, then suppress it.
It's a deeply resonant question, isn't it? It speaks to that tragic element in human history. But the sources offer, I think, a compelling rebuttal, or at least a counter-perspective, grounded in why humans strive and create despite that history.
Which is it?
Well, several things. First, there's the idea that hope consistently overcomes memory. Each generation, perhaps naively but also necessarily, believes they can be the ones to finally break the destructive pattern. Second, creation itself seems intrinsically fundamental to human nature. We build, we innovate, we explore. It's just what we do, even knowing the risks.
And third, is there actual progress?
Yes. Despite the devastating setbacks, the long-term historical trajectory, viewed over centuries, does show a net increase in human flourishing, knowledge, health, and capabilities. Progress isn't linear. It's often 2 steps forward, 1 step back, sometimes 1 step forward, 2 steps back. But it does seem to be real over the long arc.
So MCAI's role in this view isn't to somehow magically prevent human nature from being destructive, but maybe to help us learn faster, to shorten the destructive cycles.
Precisely. Its proposed role is to act as a tool that models the potential long-term consequences of our often short-term, emotionally driven decisions. to help us see the destructive patterns, both individual and collective, before we blindly act on them again, and to provide data-driven alternative pathways.
So the argument is, the real shame isn't in building a powerful tool like this.
The argument is the greater shame, the greater irresponsibility would be to stop building, to stop advancing knowledge, and just passively accept the endless repetition of destructive historical patterns out of fear or willful ignorance. MCAI is presented as a tool for learning from history, not ignoring it.
Okay, but the tool itself, it's only as good as its data, its algorithms, its ethics.
Yeah.
We absolutely have to talk about the reliability, the strength, the weaknesses of a system holding this much potential power.
Absolutely critical. Compared to purely human judgment, MCAI clearly has some potential strengths outlined in the sources. It's fundamentally data-driven, making it less susceptible to immediate emotional biases or wishful thinking.
Right.
It has, theoretically, superior pattern recognition capabilities across massive, complex, global data sets that no human brain could possibly process. It offers consistency, it won't have a bad day, and perfect recall of historical data and patterns.
And how does this accuracy compare to humans?
Well, human decision accuracy is notoriously variable, isn't it? Depending on the person, the situation, their expertise, their stress level, it can range wildly, maybe from 40% accuracy in some complex predictions to 95% in areas of deep expertise. MCAI's accuracy is projected to be less variable, more consistently falling within maybe the 70% to 90% range, depending on the domain and the quality of the data.
Which strongly suggests that the optimal approach isn't human versus AI, but human plus AI collaboration.
That seems to be the conclusion, yes. Where the human provides context, ethical judgment, intuition, common sense, and the AI provides the scale, the pattern recognition, the data analysis, the consistency, each compensates for the other's inherent weaknesses.
Okay, so let's talk about those weaknesses then. What are the big ones for MCI?
They are significant and inherent to almost any large-scale AI system, especially one trained on messy human data. First and foremost, the classic problem: garbage in, garbage out.
Meaning biased data leads to biased results.
Exactly. If the historical data used to train MCAI reflects past injustices, biases, or inequalities, which it inevitably will, then the patterns the AI learns and mirrors back will also be biased, potentially reinforcing those very inequalities rather than helping overcome them.
We saw that risk clearly in the sentencing example. What else?
Second, the black box problem. MCAI might identify a critical pattern, say it flags you for a high risk of a certain disease or predicts a market crash, but its internal reasoning process for why it reached that conclusion might be incredibly complex and opaque, even to its creators.
So you can't easily verify its logic.
Right, and if you can't understand or verify why the AI is recommending a certain course of action, especially for really high-stakes decisions like medical treatment or, say, military strategy, it becomes incredibly difficult to trust it or rely on it responsibly.
Makes sense. Third weakness.
Third is the risk of overfitting. This is a technical term, but it basically means the AI gets too good at finding patterns in the specific data it was trained on, to the point where it starts seeing meaningful patterns in random noise or coincidences. It's like a form of digital pareidolia, seeing faces in the clouds. It might flag patterns that aren't actually real or predictive in the real world.
Seeing ghosts in the data.
Essentially, yes. And finally, perhaps the most fundamental challenge is value alignment. The AI will be programmed to optimize for something, maybe efficiency or health outcomes or economic growth or social stability. But who decides which values get prioritized? Who decides what patterns are good or desirable to encourage and which are bad or undesirable to interrupt? It's not a technical question, it's a deeply ethical and political one.
And those values could differ wildly between cultures or even individuals.
Profoundly so. Getting that value alignment right and ensuring it serves broad human flourishing rather than narrow interests is perhaps the single biggest hurdle.
Okay, so if we're even contemplating building this digital mirror that knows us so intimately, trust and transparency are not just nice-to-haves, they are absolutely essential. What kind of safeguards must be built in, according to the sources?
The sources outline several non-negotiable requirements for governance and trust. First is transparency. Users need to have at least a clear conceptual understanding of how MCAI reaches its conclusions, even if the complex math underneath isn't fully graspable. No complete black boxes allowed for critical functions.
Okay, what's next?
Second, human oversight. There must always be a human in the loop for critical decisions. MCAI can recommend or alert, but for things like medical diagnoses, legal judgments, financial policy changes, a human must make the final call, retaining responsibility.
AI advises, human decides.
That's the principle. Third, ethical governance. The development, deployment, and ongoing auditing of MCAI systems must involve diverse stakeholders, not just technologists, but ethicists, social scientists, policymakers, and representatives from affected communities to set the boundary conditions and ensure fairness.
Not just built by Silicon Valley engineers.
Ideally, not exclusively, no. Fourth is privacy protection, which is huge. Strict, legally enforced, and technically robust limits on data collection, usage, and sharing are crucial. This includes strong anonymization techniques when data needs to be aggregated, and clear user consent protocols.
And finally, user control.
Yes, fifth is user control. Individuals must retain the ultimate ability to disregard, override, or even completely disable MCAI recommendations or monitoring for their own lives if they choose. Agency has to be preserved.
Okay, those safeguards sound necessary, but implementing them globally seems challenging. Let's break down the risks if we get this wrong. 2 levels, individual and societal. On a personal level, what are we really risking by letting this digital mirror watch us so closely?
The individual risks are quite profound and, frankly, a bit scary. The most obvious is privacy erosion. The sheer volume and intimacy of continuous cross-domain monitoring required for MCAI to function effectively is unprecedented. It risks dissolving any meaningful notion of private life.
Your whole life becomes data.
Potentially. Tied to that is a potential loss of autonomy. If the system becomes incredibly good at predicting what's best for you, the optimal career path, the ideal partner, the healthiest diet, we might become overly reliant on it, losing our ability or even desire to make our own choices, take risks, make mistakes.
Just following the algorithm's path.
Yes. Then there's the potential for serious identity confusion. Imagine the AI consistently points out patterns in your behavior or thinking that you weren't aware of, or maybe don't even like. The source material asks, who am I if this AI seems to know my predictable patterns better than I know myself? That could be deeply unsettling.
A kind of existential crisis prompted by data.
It could be. And finally, perhaps the most dangerous individual risk is manipulation vulnerability. If an AI has such a deep, data-driven understanding of your personal triggers, biases, fears, and desires, then malicious actors, corporations, governments, even individuals could potentially hijack or exploit that system to manipulate you, to steer your purchasing decisions, your political views, your relationships in ways that benefit them, not you.
That's incredibly sobering. Now scale that up to the societal level. The risks there feel almost existential, that potential for misuse by powerful, centralized players.
It's terrifying, frankly. The number one societal risk usually cited is authoritarian potential. A centralized state controlling a national-level MCAI, integrating data from everyone's health, finances, communications, movements. It's the ultimate tool for surveillance, prediction, and social control. Dissent could be predicted and preempted before it even manifests. Anomalous behavior could be instantly flagged and corrected. It's Orwell's Big Brother powered by godlike AI.
Total control. What other societal risks?
Another major concern is inequality entrenchment. If access to the most powerful MCAI insights and optimization tools is primarily available only to the wealthy or powerful, better health interventions, better financial advice, better career navigation, then the system could end up dramatically widening the gap between the haves and have-nots, locking in privilege rather than expanding opportunity.
The benefits flow upwards.
Yes. And finally, there's a more subtle but still significant risk: monoculture risk. If everyone starts following the optimal recommendations generated by MCAI, the same career advice, the same relationship strategies, the same healthy lifestyle, we could inadvertently reduce vital human diversity, creativity, and resilience. Society might become more efficient, but also more brittle, more uniform, and less able to adapt to unforeseen future challenges. Everyone optimizing for the same local maximum.
Losing the messiness that drives innovation and resilience.
Exactly. Sometimes suboptimal choices and diverse paths are necessary for long-term adaptation.
We also can't ignore the weird ways humans might react. The unintended side effects of being constantly analyzed and guided by an AI.
Absolutely. The sources acknowledge this human factor. Humans don't like feeling controlled, even if it's for their own good. One likely side effect is pattern resistance. People might deliberately act against the AI's recommendations, even if they seem logical, simply to assert their freedom, their agency, their unpredictability. You can't tell me what to do. Which, ironically, could lead to worse outcomes for them.
Doing the wrong thing just to prove you can.
Precisely. Then there's the near certainty of gaming the system. If MCAI outputs are tied to real-world benefits, like lower insurance premiums for healthy patterns or social credit scores for pro-social behavior, people will inevitably find ways to manipulate their visible behavior to trick the AI to produce the right patterns on the surface without actually making genuine internal changes.
Faking it for the algorithm.
Happens already, right? And lastly, there's the unsettling possibility of nocebo effects. That's the opposite of the placebo effect. If the AI delivers a negative prediction, you have a high probability of relationship failure, or your financial forecast looks bleak. The user might internalize that prediction, lose hope, and subconsciously act in ways that make it become a self-fulfilling prophecy simply because the all-knowing AI said it would happen.
Wow. The AI's prediction creates the reality.
It's a documented psychological phenomenon and could be amplified by the perceived authority of a system like MCAI.
Okay, so wrapping up this critical assessment part, the timeline. Given all these immense challenges, the technical hurdles, the massive social and ethical questions, the regulatory nightmares, when can we realistically expect something like a truly functional, integrated MCAI system to exist?
It's definitely not happening overnight. The sources emphasize that while we have basic components today, pattern recognition in specific apps like health trackers or financial tools, targeted advertising algorithms, the fully integrated cross-domain MCAI ecosystem they describe is a long-term, probably multi-decade project.
What are the phases?
Phase 1, which the sources suggest we're kind of in now, roughly 2025 to 2028, is about laying the groundwork. Improving sensor accuracy and reliability, developing initial robust single-domain applications, maybe really good AI health coaches or adaptive learning platforms, and crucially, starting to hammer out those fundamental privacy standards and ethical guidelines. That's foundational.
Okay, so when do we get the version that can actually connect the dots? The one that can say, like your earlier example, your bad sleep is causing your impulsive spending.
The realistic projection for that kind of meaningful cross-domain integrated MCAI application seems to be around 7 to 10 years out. So think roughly the 2032 to 2035 timeframe. That's when the AI might credibly start offering those kinds of holistic, interconnected insights about your life patterns.
And the really advanced stuff, the global economic predictions, the societal collapse modeling, the deeply integrated social pattern analysis.
That full, highly sophisticated ecosystem is projected much further out, probably 20 to 25 years, putting us somewhere around 2045 to 2050, assuming progress continues and we manage to navigate the ethical and regulatory minefields.
What are the biggest roadblocks? Is it the tech?
Interestingly, the sources suggest the primary limiting factors might not be purely technical, although challenges like sensor accuracy, battery life, and processing power are real. The bigger hurdles are likely to be social and regulatory, building widespread public trust in such an intimate system, achieving cultural acceptance, and maybe the hardest part, establishing consistent, globally enforceable privacy laws and ethical standards across vastly different political systems and competing jurisdictions. That coordination problem is immense.
Yeah, I could see that. And development itself will probably look completely different depending on where it's being built, right?
Yeah.
The political context must shape it massively.
Oh, absolutely. The sources sketch out a few likely scenarios based on political culture. In Western liberal democracies, you'd expect development to be more fragmented, driven by competing private companies. The emphasis would likely be on individual user consent, privacy protections, at least nominally, and features that cater to consumer markets or corporate efficiency.
More market-driven. What about authoritarian states?
In authoritarian regimes, the pattern would likely be the opposite: highly centralized, state-controlled development. The emphasis would shift towards monitoring collective behavior patterns, social stability, surveillance integration, perhaps explicitly linking MCAI insights to social credit systems or dissent suppression. Individual privacy would be a much lower priority than state control.
A tool for control primarily. And developing nations.
Developing nations might follow a third path. They might leapfrog some of the consumerist applications and focus their MCAI development efforts directly on addressing basic needs and essential services. Using pattern recognition to optimize food distribution networks, manage scarce water resources more effectively, predict disease outbreaks, or deliver personalized education and public health advice at scale, potentially bypassing existing infrastructural limitations, using it as a tool for rapid development.
3 very different potential futures for the same core technology. Okay, we've covered a massive amount of ground here. This whole deep dive has really been about understanding this proposed MCAI framework using pattern recognition at every scale, from your personal sleep habits all the way up to the rise and fall of civilizations, potentially as a tool to help us break these cycles of error, inefficiency, and maybe even self-destruction.
That really is the core promise, or perhaps the core hope, embedded in the MCAI concept. It's pitched not just as a prediction engine, but as a technology for enabling hyper-personalized self-awareness and, crucially, enabling timely, targeted intervention based on that awareness.
Right. We saw that potential clearly in the health examples,
Yeah.
like John getting that pre-symptomatic warning about his heart condition.
Or in career development, with Marcus finding a path that aligned better with his underlying values and brought him more fulfillment.
And even on a societal level, using pattern analysis to identify and potentially start correcting deep-seated systemic unfairness, like the biases found in the criminal justice sentencing data.
Exactly. The argument is that the system's greatest potential value might lie precisely there in making visible these huge, slow-moving, or deeply embedded patterns, the historical precursors to crisis, the systemic injustices that are just too vast, too complex, or too uncomfortable for our normal human cognition or our existing institutions to reliably detect and address.
So the conclusion seems to be, yes, building MCAI is undeniably risky. Hugely risky, given the potential for misuse, the ethical complexities, the privacy implications we've discussed.
The risks are profound, no doubt about it.
But the source material argues that the alternative remaining ignorant of these deeper patterns, continuing to repeat the same destructive mistakes generation after generation, simply because we lack the tools to see them clearly, that alternative has historically proven to be even more dangerous.
That's the provocative thesis, yes. That calculated risk, guided by strong ethics and safeguards, might be preferable to the certainty of repeating unexamined history.
Which brings us to the final thought for you, our listener. After everything we've explored today, if the fundamental purpose of an AI like MCAI is to hold up that mirror, to help you see and potentially break destructive or limiting patterns in your own life or in the world around you, what's the first pattern you'd want it to analyze? What's that one deeply ingrained personal habit, or maybe that frustrating societal dynamic that you instinctively feel is holding things back, but you just can't quite see clearly enough on your own to truly understand or change? Something to think about.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
We'll see you soon.
This is DigitView.